I'm Lexy Davis, a love embodiment coach who helps people create a love that feels like home, and I'm here to bring more romance and playfulness into the world. I'm also an international retreat host, vibe curator, and human connector. I serve people through my business, Alive to Enjoy, and this podcast where I invite guests from around the world to sprinkle their wisdom and expand your perspective so you can create the deepest love you possibly can reach in this lifetime. I also want you to live the most joyous life, whatever that looks like to you, and I hope that this slice of the internet brings you lots of smiles and helps you keep your heart open. Thank you for choosing Heart Snuggles to be in your ears each week, and I'm so glad you're here with me. Welcome, Heart Snugglers. So excited for this beautiful guest today and just get to know you better as well. But I know they're going to love your wisdom. So please share a little bit about you and what you do.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. Really, I was so honored when you reached out and asked me to be on the podcast. So my name is Hadhee Jah. I'm originally from the Maldives, and I am an Ayurvedic postpartum doula. But I'm also one of the last or possibly the only doula from my country, which is a crazy thing to say. I wish it wasn't true, but yeah. So I support women through prenatal, postpartum, and I don't really attend births yet because I have young kids of my own. But yeah, I'm definitely here for the postpartum.
So
Yeah.
beautiful. And I'm really excited to dive into your story. But first, we'll just ask the questions of the podcast, which the first one is, what was the last random act of kindness someone did for you?
Ooh, well, not so random, but I've had a friend who's just been supporting me really amazingly. She just rang me just before, and she will send me messages when I'm feeling at my lowest, and
Mm.
just a little purple love heart from her, and I'm just like, someone's there.
It's so beautiful how intuitive our friends are and just how those messages always reach us. And you're just like, you have no idea what that meant to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And the next question is, what truth about love did you learn the hard way and you wish someone would have told you?
Yeah, so this is the big lesson in my life at the moment. I have just to give you a bit of backstory. I have just separated from my husband of 4 years. We've been together 8 years, but married four. And yeah, it's been a bit of a roller coaster of a relationship, but I've really been learning about trauma bonding through that experience and how what I thought was love was not real. It was more disguised, love disguising itself. So, yeah, I mean, it's all love in the end, isn't it? When we go to the depths. But yeah, that's been really painful to realize because I thought he was the one.
Mm. So what would you tell someone that's in a similar situation to understand that maybe it's a trauma bond?
Well, if there's no respect, there's no love.
Mm.
This is the thing. This is what's been gnawing at me for years now, that there's been, this unevenness in the level of respect that's given and received. And yeah, I mean, I've given my devotion to him, but it's just not been returned in that way. And yeah,
Mm.
that would be the bottom line. If there's no respect, that it's not love.
Mm. Beautiful.
Mm.
Thank you so much. And really unfortunate everything you had to go through. Yeah, it's so wild to me that love is this thing we all desire and want and crave, and then it's also one of the most painful places that for us, and it's just so complex because it just seems like such a simple thing, but it really isn't.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, well, let's go into your story and would love to hear, yeah, about your lineage and how you ended up as a birth keeper. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a bit of a crazy story because just to give you a bit of context, in my country, birth has been medicalized for the past 30 or so years, completely medicalized. In the past, we had a really robust system of traditional midwives all through the islands of the Maldives. So every village had midwives and herbalists and people who would attend births, aunties, grandmas. The knowledge was held in the family, but since the advent of modernization and medicalization, which is a form of colonization, we have lost all of our indigenous midwifery traditions. And there are few women and men still left who hold the wisdom, but they are elderly, and there are no young people that I'm aware of, apart from myself, that are seeking to bridge the gap and to preserve that knowledge. So I found this out because I live in Australia. If I lived in the Maldives, I wouldn't have been able to birth my babies at home. So all three of my babies were born at home by my choice. And my last baby was a free birth, which was not attended by a midwife, or an earthly midwife rather. So yeah, I fell in love with birth through my experiences with birth, and decided that I wanted to support other women in having, sovereign birth experiences. And I trained as a birth doula at first, and then I supported my best friend during her birth. And what that made me realize is that not all home birth is created equal. So you can get a lot of variation in the people that attend the birth, which can really change how the birth is being experienced by the woman. So I'm an advocate of physiological birth, which means undisturbed as much as possible. The body has the wisdom and the blueprint to give birth. So physiological birth works best when we are just able to witness it. That's what I've learned through my own birth experiences, and that's what I've felt and what I've wanted in support. And when I supported my best friend, I realized that the midwives were there with a particular agenda and a particular way of doing things. And I witnessed how that, it didn't derail her birth completely, but it did introduce an element of birth trauma, which was really painful to her. And also as a witness, it was painful to me. And then afterwards, I realized that I didn't know anything about postpartum. The light bulb hadn't gone off in my head afterwards, And I just went, wait a minute, I don't actually know what she needs now. I knew what she needed during birth, but I didn't know what she needed afterwards. And as these things happen, I just happened to come across my current teacher, who is Sarva Blackwell from Inner Sun and Moon, and she was talking about the Ayurvedic postpartum, the way of the Ayurvedic postpartum. And instantly I was just like, yes, this is exactly what I have been missing from my education. So I just dived straight into that. And it was so beautiful, because I did not realize how holistic Ayurvedic postpartum care is. There's like a specific diet that is fed, because the digestive fire goes out at the moment of birth. So there's very specific foods that need to be introduced in ways. There's remedies. The mother is supposed to be massaged every day with warm oil for those 40 days, which is like, when I heard that, I cried, because I was like, oh my goodness, imagine if we lived in a world where new mothers are massaged every single day. Because, after you give birth, you're so sore and you're so raw, and you just want and need that level of tending. And here was a system that was not just offering that had been offering it for centuries. And then as I began learning the remedies and all the recipes, I would tell my mom about what I was learning, and she would just turn around and go, oh, that's what we used to do, and it just came full circle. In that point, I was like, wow, so Ayurvedic postpartum care was our postpartum care in our lineage. So I connected the dots because it hadn't really occurred to me, and it just became really like an amazing way of everything just coming full circle. And then I found out I was pregnant while I was in the course, and it was really profound opportunity to apply everything to myself. So, and that's what I did. And I ended up having a bit of a traumatic birth experience, but just having that knowledge and education of what my body needed postpartum helped me heal so fast and become stronger. And I know it works because I lived it. And that's how I came to that.
Wow. I always love how magical our gifts, what we're supposed to do comes into our life. And yeah, now that you're saying this, I nannied maybe 6 years ago for a woman who did Ayurvedic care, and she told me she was getting massage every day. I already knew about Ayurveda, but not directly with pregnancy. And so I was just like, I immediately was like, that's for me. I know that that's what I want. And yeah, her diet, and it just felt so good in my body when I heard her share that. And she even had a craniosacral during birth, and like just all these like cool practices that we're not even shown the world of possibilities around birth. Like there's so many options besides laying there with your feet up, like on a hospital bed, which is just the incorrect position. Like, there's so much to it. So I'm just so grateful for women like you that are, yeah, just showing women new ways to give birth and like that are actually so supportive. And there's so many places I want to go. But I guess first is I would love to hear like what are some traditions from the Maldives that are used for this process of birth?
Yeah, so I actually recently had my auntie visit and stay with us for a few days, and it was really beautiful because I got to ask her about her life in the village. So she's one of those few women who remembers what life was like before modernization happened. And I asked her about my grandmother's birth experiences, and she told me that they lived in like a big one, sort of a one room house, and then there was a curtain that was drawn across the birthing space. And as soon as the woman went into labor, all the women from the neighboring area would come, the aunties, the grandmothers, they would just come and boil water and take care of the kids because my grandmother had lots and lots of kids. So they would come and support the whole family. And then what the men would do is they would sit outside the house because there was always an outside seating area. And they would sit there and burn incense and pray through the whole process. Yeah, they were just like guardians at the door until it was all done. They would sit and pray. And I just thought that was so amazing. And then she described the birthing space. There would be a rope hanging from one of the beams for the mother to hold on to while she was giving birth. So they were giving birth upright using this rope. They were having this rope to support them bearing down. But then I actually saw a clip of a traditional midwife speaking because one of my friends, she has been going out to interview midwives in the islands of the Maldives just on her own. And she sent me this clip from one of those traditional midwives, and she was saying, yeah, so after we're there for the birth, we help out. Afterwards, we tuck her into bed, give her some tea, make sure the baby's breastfeeding and latched and, everything's good. And then I go home. And then I come back, and that's when my work actually begins. And I was just like, wow, that's amazing, because we have so much and awareness and energy concentrated on the birth itself. It's like the peak experience. And then afterwards, the mother is just left, to whatever, come back together, like, she has this whole new human, and there's nothing really there to support her in this way. So the midwife said, she would come back and she would, like, we used to have this special bed that was made of rope, almost like, I don't know how to describe it, like it was woven with rope, so there were open spaces, and the mother would lie on this bed every single day, and they would put coals underneath the bed and they would make her sweat. And this is present in a lot of indigenous cultures around the world, this idea of mother warming, because the mother after birth is really vulnerable and susceptible to those elements of cold and dampness and moisture. It's almost like when the birth happens, like the fire in the house goes out and you get all the drafts and everything rushing into the body. And this is where the mother warming is so critical. We wrap the mother, there's belly binding, there's specific spices that are designed to warm the body, like ginger and different types of pepper. And yeah, it's just so holistic. And that we also have the same daily warm oil massage, and that extended to the baby as well. So one of the things the grandmother would do was put the baby on her lap, and she would sing songs to the baby and massage the baby and stretch the arms, stretch the legs, and like really touch the two like opposite arms together. I remember seeing sometimes like women doing this for babies when I was a little girl, and it's just the most beautiful, gorgeous thing. You just like sit there mesmerized,
Oh,
But you think about babies being curled up for so long, its whole life, and now it's come out into the world, and they really help the baby's limbs to just unfold, and it's just so beautiful.
wow, I have chills. That sounds like so precious. And again, it makes sense, the heating and that warmth, and then also nurturing the baby in this way. That's so sweet. I've never heard that before. I love that. Aw.
Yeah.
Wow. I love that you're so passionate about, really understanding all of these practices. I mean, that's feels so scary that they're all just going to vanish, if you don't like take the initiative to really learn them. And they sound incredibly beautiful from everything you're describing.
Yeah, they are so nourishing and so needed. The reason we practiced like this for generations is because it works.
Hmm.
And it's because the mother needs it. And this is what is missing from the modern world, that understanding. So if we look back to our traditions all across the board, you will find very much there's a lot of similarities in the way the Chinese traditional postpartum care, places like Guatemala, Colombia, Mexico, they all do the same thing. The mother has to be warmed, the mother has to be wrapped. There's so much tending that goes on for that 40 days.
Yeah. And the most common saying is postpartum depression. So we're just like focused on these things, but it's like there's actually so many ways we can prevent that and support that. And yeah, so what would you recommend to support this postpartum journey?
Well, I would recommend firstly learning about something like Ayurvedic postpartum care, because once you know the reasons why things are done, then it makes a lot of sense, like learn about the doshas and what happens to Vata dosha, which is the constitutional aspect that is out of balance after birth universally. Doesn't matter what the woman's constitution is, that she can be really pitta or really kapha. It doesn't matter what her individual constitution is. After birth, every single woman universally needs that process of calming Vata dosha, which is the element of air, space, movement. And that makes sense because once the baby exits, there's a lot of empty space. And this is where practices like belly binding is really powerful for closing that space and helping the body actually realign so the organs can go back to their normal spaces that they were in before pregnancy. And the uterus is also going through the process of involution, which is where it's cramping slowly getting smaller and smaller. And this can take 4 to 6 weeks. So that's why it's recommended to do belly binding every single day, if possible, just to help position the uterus properly so it can go back into its right place. And then the mother gets this beautiful sense of holding. And this was one of those practices that I really leaned on after birth with my baby, because it was very traumatic in the end because we ended up in a hospital transfer because my placenta wasn't birthing. And that's because I wasn't supported in the way that I needed to be during birth. But I found that as soon as I started wrapping my belly, I was like, oh, I can do this now. I can do this. I feel like I'm being stitched back together. So, yeah.
So precious. Like, yeah. I mean, who doesn't love the feeling of being held? So, especially in a time where you're giving birth to a new life, like you need extra holding. And so I only recently heard about belly binding and I was just in awe of it makes so much sense just from like the actual, as you said, organs going back into place, but then the emotional, energetic feeling of being held is amazing. And I really would love to hear if you're open to this, yeah, the birth, how you healed through the birth trauma and kind of the experience of it, and how you're still an advocate for holistic birthing with that. Yeah.
Yeah, so when I found out I was pregnant while I was studying to be an Ayurvedic postpartum doula, I was like, yes, I know what I need for birth. I know what I need for postpartum. So I prepared like I've never prepared before. I made all the herbal ghees and the oils. And yeah, so it wasn't because I wasn't prepared. I had everything stacked, ready. I was like, yep, I'm the guinea pig this time. So it was really exciting. And I had a very challenging pregnancy as well. I mean, there were problems in the relationship, which were constant throughout from the beginning, really, but it started getting quite challenging this pregnancy, or every pregnancy, because it's my second child with him. So, yeah, there was that. And I also had a lot of physical ailments. I was very nauseous and really depleted and exhausted from not having given myself that postpartum care in the past. So by the time I went into this pregnancy, I was so depleted already. So it was very, very challenging. So here in Australia, we have hospital home birth programs, which are free, so accessible to the public. So I had gone through the same system before, and with my second baby, and I found them to be very interventionist. So this time I still wanted someone there, but I couldn't afford to hire a private midwife. So I decided I would just get myself into the program, and then I'll maybe just not call my midwife until afterwards and just have someone there as a backup. But then as I met with my midwife over the course of the last few weeks of my pregnancy, I just started feeling like, she turned up to the birth, to our first meeting wearing a surgical mask. And instantly I was just like, I can't connect with this person, and it wasn't like I was going to have her at the birth, but it was an energy that started growing in me, that this unease that I was still participating in a system that I knew wasn't going to actually support my choice to birth undisturbed. And she told me just the same, in not in those same words, but she basically said to me that the policies with the hospital are that they have to monitor with the Doppler. They have to put the Doppler on me every time I have a contraction. And then when I'm pushing, it's every 5 minutes. And I was just like, that's not an undisturbed birth at all.
Yeah.
That's like very, very disturbed. So I just decided, you know what, I don't need this energy. I don't want this energy going into my birth. So I felt confident, and I had already asked a friend who was also an Ayurvedic doula to attend the birth. And, she was going to give me Abhyanga when I went into labor and all these beautiful practices, because I made birth oil and infused with jasmine, like my teacher taught me. And it was just going to be really beautiful. But unfortunately, on the night of my labor, so I discharged myself from the system. So I only had this friend who was going to attend and another friend as a backup in case I needed someone else there. The night I went into labor was the night of my due date. And unfortunately, my doula had turned her phone off. I believe that's what had happened. So I was calling and she wasn't picking up. Well, it wasn't even ringing. And I just became it was a really full-on experience to realize whilst you're mid-birth, oh, nobody's going to come for me. I'm going to have to do this on my own, because I was just like, oh, well, you wanted to free birth. Here you go. And I was just like fighting it at the same time, going, no, I just want someone to touch me. I just wanted someone to rub my oil on my hips because they felt like they were breaking in half. It was so full on. And I just started sinking into this like like I started getting really, really upset in the process. And that's when I had this really extraordinary experience of my grandmother, who passed away on my 19th birthday, came through and stood behind me and held my shoulders and just said, I'm your midwife now. I still I want to cry when I tell the story because it was so profound.
Mm.
And she was so present. I felt her, the way she was hunched over behind me, the way she walked, everything was just there. And she started showing me what was happening in my body. She brought a clarity and grounded me. And I could feel that the baby was starting to descend down the birth canal. And by that time, my husband had called a backup friend and she had arrived and she came in and she had read my birth plan. So my husband hadn't even read my birth plan. So he didn't really know what to do apart from set up the space. He was kind of just hanging back and I couldn't speak to him. I couldn't communicate. I just want someone to touch me, but he wouldn't approach me. So it was like this really unpleasant experience. But as soon as my friend walked in, it was like she came in and there was warm oil on my hips at the same time. It was like the simultaneous relief of someone's here, someone's touching me, and my grandmother's also holding me, so I was just crying with joy at that point. And also whilst my baby was literally descending down the birth canal. It was, really intense. Then my grandmother said to me very clearly, he's coming now. Someone needs to catch him. And I just managed to speak to them and I said, oh, he's coming. So you need to catch him. So they managed to get into position, but he slipped out of my husband's hands as he came through. And my friend was watching from behind and she said, he just rolled out of my body onto my thighs. It was my thighs that caught him, the back of my legs, and he rolled down into the back of my legs, basically. And I just did this crazy maneuver and I turned around and grabbed him and he was in my arms in an instant. And like I don't even remember any of this, you know. And
Oh,
she was like, I just saw everything just was so seamless. He just rolled out and you just had him.
wow.
Yeah, but it was so exhausting. At that point, I fell asleep. And that's when my cervix closed and the labor process was interrupted. And I slept for about an hour while he latched and he fed. And when I woke up, we realized we had this real sinking feeling, oh, the placenta hasn't come yet. And it just didn't feel right. It felt really, really like something was wrong. So we ended up calling the ambulance and I ended up getting taken lights and sirens down the freeway with my baby in my arms, placenta still inside me, you know. And then as I arrived at the hospital, that was my very first experience of what hospital is like during birth because there were people all around me. They were telling me all the worst case scenarios. You know, I hadn't finished giving birth and they were saying things like, oh, we're going to have to inject you with syntocinon now. And then they kept injecting me. Every 5 minutes, they were injecting me with syntocinon, tugging on the cord, trying to get the placenta out. And nothing was happening. Then they were saying, oh, it feels like you have a lot of blood in your womb. We think you've hemorrhaged. And I was like, I don't think I'm hemorrhaging. I feel fine. And they were like, oh yeah, we'll probably have to cut out your uterus. And I'm just like, why are you saying these things to me? You don't even know. And they were like, yeah, we'll give you a blood transfusion. We have to take you straight to operating theater. And I'm just like, no, you will not do any of these things. And I just sat up in the bed and I was like, I had to become my own advocate because my husband was not really present. He was there, but he wasn't able to advocate for me. So I was like, all right, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. I don't want an epidural because I don't want to stay here overnight. You're going to give me a general anesthetic and you're going to get this placenta out. Nobody's giving me a blood transfusion. So I was just like so clear and I'm so fierce in that moment, you know, because I had to protect us. And I was like, you're not touching my baby while I'm unconscious. Nobody's going to approach my baby, weigh my baby, prick his heel, none of those things is going to happen when I'm unconscious. And so they took me into the operating theater. It was the first time I've ever been separated from my baby at birth. And it was seriously the worst feeling. Like I have now, I just really feel for all women in that situation because I went through that. And there is nothing like that kind of pain that comes when watching the baby get more and more distant and you're going the opposite direction. It just feels so wrong. But they found out that they didn't have to do any of those things because my placenta was literally just sitting on the inside of my cervix. My cervix had closed. It was just sitting there. They just went in. They didn't have to cut me open, nothing. They just went in and it came out. It just flopped out. And yeah, so I was really like, it was a real blessing in that instant, you know, that I didn't have to have any surgical interventions like that. And when I woke up, we just got out of there as fast as we could and got home. And yeah, I told one of my best friends in the Maldives the story about what happened with the placenta. And she called her mum, who was a traditional midwife in the past. And she just said, oh, if I'd been there, you know, I would have just put my hand there on the top of the uterus and pressed down and pressed inwards like that. And my other hand would have been down at the cervix and it would have just flopped out. And I was just like, wow, like all of that fuss, all of those injections I got, all the terrifying experience of being in the hospital. And here was a woman on an island in the Maldives just going, yeah, it would have just flopped out. And
Mm.
it just changed my life. Those words just completely changed my life. And I realized like this is something that we really need to preserve. You know, as women, the system isn't going to do this for us. As women, we need to look backwards and pull that knowledge with us forwards because our descendants are going to need this.
My love, you've built a life, you've built a career, you've built a success. But when it comes to love and softening and receiving, you're always the one in control, always thinking, planning, and doing. What if you didn't have to? Soft Girl Season is your invitation to melt into life where you feel safe, supported, and adored, where you actually can trust men, trust God, and trust yourself. Inside, women have found their dream partners, started receiving clients with less effort, and watched their men step up to pamper, cherish, and adore them, all by learning how to soften into their feminine energy. They've gone from feeling numb and guarded to magnetic, deeply loved, and radiant. So if you're ready to stop over-functioning and start being treated like a queen, come inside Soft Girl Season and let yourself be the woman who has it all. Join us using the link in the show notes and receive instant access and start being provided for by God and men.
Wow. I teared up during your story multiple times. I'm so grateful for you sharing this and just your courage and your surrender and everything of your character was just your heart is so shown in that story and how challenging. I can't even imagine that feeling of like, yeah, being in that moment without anybody really there for you and then your grandma coming in and that's just so I got full body chills when you shared that part, especially. And then I'm just so happy that you had that knowledge because I would say, I don't know, 90% of women would never know that they can say no and say, don't cut out my uterus. And they would just say, okay, do it. I trust you because you know best. And that just shows that you're actually connected to your body because that's so unnecessary and so scary. And wow, there's just so many elements of that story that it's horrible that it happened that way, and I'm glad that you can now like educate people. And it's like, yes, there's just a simple hand gesture would
Yeah.
have gotten it out, you know? It's like touch again comes back to that element of like, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. And so, yeah, I guess now I see like, so through the birth trauma made you even more firm in like your belief around all of these holistic practices because of that experience there. And I'm actually still quite surprised that, most women I talk to don't even consider anything outside of hospital birth.
It is really tragic because when we lose that, particularly home birth, because that's how all our ancestors were born mostly, up until the most recent generations and the advent of allopathic medicine, which is an amazing thing. It's a miraculous thing. And obviously, in terms of trauma responses and surgical interventions and all these things. Like there's a lot of life saving that does go on within allopathic medicine, of course. But at the end of the day, we have been giving birth in a certain way because it connects us to our lineage. And once we lose that, so I read somewhere recently that only about 2% of women in the world give birth at home. I know it's a completely like jaw dropping statistic. I can't remember exactly where I read it, but it's just not going to bode well for our descendants if we continue to allow this pattern to play out. Because we are not just losing how to give birth, we're losing those traditions around how to care for the mother after birth, which allopathic medicine has no idea about. They think, 6-week checkup, it's all about the baby. It's just not enough. It's not enough. And we have this epidemic in the world, especially in my country, like there's so many women because it's completely medicalized. They have awful birth experiences. They have, some women end up getting cut without consent, and so many different interventions that they would not have consented to if they, as you say, if they knew anything outside of that. But it only takes that severing and one single generation to forget how we used to give birth and the ways of our ancestors, which were so gentle and so loving and really held space for the soul to come through, which is devoid. The modern medicine is just devoid of soul. I think a lot of people can look at it and go, yeah, that's pretty fair to say that, as amazing as it is, when we go into labor, even the studies they've done around the way the hormones work, the cascade of hormones and how, one will come in and then the other one and then the other one. And everything's like this beautiful dance of nature working that blueprint out. And yet when you get to the hospital, you have these lights and harsh lights, strangers. There is no intimacy. that can be experienced. You know, even if you've planned for a hospital birth, you've dimmed the lights, it's still a foreign environment. And that stops the hormones from working. And a lot of the time women arrive at a hospital to give birth and their labor will stall. And then that will bring in other interventions from the, policy side, because they're on the clock by the time they walk in the door, So yeah, I think it's just so vital. Like, I feel like we could drop everything and just lift up this preservation of ancestral birth practices, and as a civilization we would evolve in ways that are so much more peaceful than what they are at the moment.
Yeah, I'm really passionate about this too. The main thing I hear is, well, what if something goes wrong? I think the biggest fear during home birth is most women are like, I don't want to even risk it. So what would you say to that?
Well, what I would say is that it's actually safer to allow birth to unfold in its according to its physiological blueprint. So that doesn't mean, we're going to wing it. That means we're going to become educated about what that process looks like, what to expect at each stage, and how to identify when something is going wrong, such as for myself, when I felt the placenta still being inside me felt wrong, and that didn't necessarily mean I needed medical intervention, as the reflection from the traditional midwife said, oh, we have ways to assist that. So what I would say is get as much knowledge as possible about the process of birth, about what happens after birth, and about what feels right for you in that situation. Some women don't feel safe unless they're in a hospital. If that's the case, then go for that. But learn about how birth is meant to unfold so you can mitigate some of those harshness. You can dim the lights, you can have a doula possibly, or you can eat and drink during labor, because some policies don't allow things like that, which is, if you actually understand process of birth, that doesn't help, when you can't eat or drink and you're hungry whilst you're in labor, it doesn't help. There are so many moving parts, and I do understand that feeling of what if something goes wrong. And this is why I wanted support myself. You need people there who are experienced in understanding birth. So, for instance, my very first home birth that I had over 12 years ago now with my eldest, I was able to afford a private midwife at the time. And I was so fortunate that she was a midwife that held space for the sacredness of birth, because not all midwives do that. And all she did, she didn't even want to come when I called her. She was like, oh yeah, I'll be there soon. You go and you do your thing. And when she finally got there, I was like, please check me. I don't know what's happening, So she just, her presence was so reassuring. And she knew instantly when I needed words and when I needed water. She was pouring water into my mouth. But most of the time, she just sat back and watched and witnessed and told, basically reassured me that my body was doing it, and then you get to that point of transition where the baby is just about to be born. And that's when she was a bit more, present. And that's when I started feeling like, oh, I can't do this anymore. I really just can't. I'm done. I'm finished. Someone just cut the baby out. I'm done. And this is a very common experience that women have during transition. And then that's when she came in and she was like, gently, gently, he's coming now. He's actually coming. You're doing it. This means you're actually going to do it, So you need someone, like, ideally, in an ideal scenario, you need someone like that who knows when to step in and when to step back. And someone who understands that when a woman is allowed to give birth through the process of her own body, she becomes transformed by that experience. She becomes the mother in that process. And it is just such a magical thing to witness. With my best friend, the first birth, she's had 2 babies now. With her first birth, she had the hospital midwives and the introduction of birth trauma and interventions and things. And I saw how hard her recovery was afterwards. She was really it was a different experience for her. She was quite broken and she had to put herself back together actively. Whereas with her second baby, she ended up free birthing. And she just seeing her the next day, like, even though she already had a little toddler, she was just radiant. I saw her a few days after she gave birth. She was radiant. She was like, her eyes were sparkling. She was so confident. It was like there was no loss of self during that birth. And that's what showed me so clearly that when women are allowed, or I mean, allowed is like a controversial way, I guess, to say, maybe not the right words, but when women allow themselves to have that experience of birthing in power and in peace, you really do become transformed by it. And you do get the opportunity to become that mother figure that is needed for the next part of the journey, you know? Otherwise, you do get that loss of self, which is what birth trauma comes with. And it's such a common experience. And most women are carrying some form of birth trauma, whether it was from their own births coming through their mother, or whether it was their birth experiences. And this is the thing we don't really address in our society universally.
Yeah, I would love for you to just share a little bit more about the importance of finding the right midwife and the difference between, as you were describing your best friends at the very beginning, home birth, or when she had the hospitalized midwives, and the difference in the unsafety you felt. Can you kind of go into that a little bit more?
Yeah, so the main difference is the licensure. So when you have people who are trained and operating within the hospital institutional protocols, they have to follow certain protocols, even if they don't agree with them. They are bound by those protocols. So for instance, when you call the midwife and they turn up to the birth, then you might not be aware of it. They are aware of this, but there's a certain time frame within which the baby then has to be born, you know? So little things like that. And like I was describing, how they have to monitor and they have to make extensive notes and things like that, which are based upon their observations and what, you know, the data they're getting from monitoring. So if you are going with a hospital midwife, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, women can have beautiful experiences even going with a hospital midwife. It's just the difference is you got to know what you're getting into, you know? So don't go into birth with that sense of, oh, I'm just going to go with the flow. Because if you have a hospital midwife, it's not going to be your flow they're going with, it's the hospital's flow. And to be honest, women who give birth in hospitals and have beautiful, powerful birth experiences are my heroes. Because I think you have gone into the most, you know, the antithesis of birth. You have surrendered into that and you have had an amazing birth experience. Wow, that is literally like godlike, you know, the transformation. So, and that's very possible. There are so many women who go through that. So I know for women in my country, we don't have the option other than to go into hospital. Home birth is not supported, and this is the case for lots of women in the world. So it's a real, like, it's a privilege for me to be able to say I had this experience of home birthing and to have the ability to even choose free birth, because so many women just don't feel they have that choice. Or in order for them to make that choice, so many things around them have to be changed, and that's not always possible. But knowing that it is perfectly possible for you to become your own midwife, for you to be your own doula, you just need to have the right kind of education and information. So it's a matter of education at the end of the day, I feel.
What are some of your favorite resources?
I really love the Reconnected, which you can find them on Instagram. They are doing some incredible work around birth trauma healing and particularly with breath work. And they've also recently, I was a part of the Gentle Beginnings Summit that they hosted with a lady called Jane Hardwick Collins, who is a really powerful female elder here in the community in Australia. And they are in the process of trying to fund the very first community-funded gentle birth hospital in Australia. So this is for women who want physiological birth. It's informed by practitioners who understand physiological birth. So it's a completely different experience to the hospital, which is informed by those interventionist policies. So these people are fully, you know, they're trauma informed to begin with, which is really unusual. So yeah, I would check out their page on Instagram and check out Hadhee Jah Health as well. This is the name of the community funded hospital. And yeah, hopefully that project can get off the ground and become the first of its kind. You know, it's more than a birth center. It's like a hybrid between a birth center and an actual hospital, because the practitioners are medically trained as well as supporting this amazing, miraculous, sacred process of birth, which is like the best of both worlds, I think.
I lived in Australia 2 years and it's so forward thinking. Like my whole holistic journey, how I even opened up, happened in Australia. So I just
Wow.
love that. I'm not even surprised that it's happening there. And I'm sure it'll take off because that is phenomenal. Like that sounds so beautiful. And I really, really hope, yeah, people get to experience that want that. Because like you said, like the lack of choice. I think even I'm in Portugal and I don't think you're even allowed to have a doula at the hospital. And there's like some
Wow.
stricter rules. I haven't looked into all of it, but I had a doula friend in town and yeah, it's quite sad. So I love that there's places in the world that are opening up opportunities to return to our real ancestral way of birthing.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't realize that. That's pretty harsh.
Yeah, 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 I don't know. I haven't even looked into all of these things, but every, country has different rules around it, and it's really fascinating that they don't let the woman who's birthing have choice. So,
I know, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Mm.
I guess on that, what are some areas that you really want to advocate for women that they can choose in their own birthing process that they might not know about?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we were discussing a lot of the time for some women, birthing the way that you want might be outside of your control because of the policies and the, government's decision making around that process. But it is possible at all to, research home birth, research physiological birth in particular, and what's happening in the body in that process. So birth education is something I really advocate for. And then there's this issue with birth education itself where they seem to think that it's all separate, birth education, postpartum, breastfeeding, they're all separate things. But if you approach it as that it's just one big experience, which is what you have when you have a baby, you go straight from pregnancy into giving birth, and then you're in postpartum and you're breastfeeding. There's no separation between those things. So just recognizing that it's all a big part of a single continuum, and that the way that you give birth is going to affect the way that you are able to breastfeed. So a lot of the times women going into hospitals, they push epidurals on them. Now, epidurals have high levels of painkillers that should not be given to babies, such as fentanyl. It's actually present in the epidural. It crosses the placenta barrier, and the baby is born with fentanyl in their system, which obviously will impact their level of awareness as they are born, but also their ability to breastfeed and latch. And, so there's this natural thing that happens once the baby is born and you put baby on your chest. The baby will do this thing called a breast crawl. It's amazing. Like the baby can't crawl yet. It's just been born, but it will find the breast and it will seek it out. And if you allow the baby to go through that physical process of breast crawl and attach itself, then the breastfeeding journey is set up for success from that point. It's so beneficial. There are so many benefits down the track as well for baby growing up, and even into adulthood. It's like that first moment of reunion between mother and baby, after they've been separated through birth. So like really, really simple little things that we don't, often we won't get that education around it in the traditional like hospital antenatal classes. They won't tell you about the breast crawl. They won't tell you that there's fentanyl in the epidural. So it is really up to the birthing woman, unfortunately, in the world that we live in, because we have lost our elders who have a lot of elders who held these traditions and these ways. It is up to the woman and up to her partner as well to educate themselves around birth. But if birth is outside of your control, and if you go through a process and come through that experience with a lot of trauma, there are still ways to heal. If you are aware of the window that opens up after birth, which is this amazing 40-day healing window. In Ayurveda, it is seen as almost like a miraculous event. And this is why so many healing therapies are poured into that, because they say you can even heal chronic conditions if proper care is given. But if proper care is not given, then the mother is being set up for 40 years of depletion. So that's why they have this saying 40 days or 42 days for 42 years, because how you heal in those 42 days is going to influence the next 4 decades of your life. So I just like, it just blows my mind every time. I never get like, I never go, oh yeah, that's whatever. I'm always like, whoa.
Yeah.
It's so big.
That's insane and so amazing that that's there. It's like, wow, okay, I will definitely take those 42 days to do what I need to set myself and my family up for the next 42 years. Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be like following it to the letter, even. It's just having that awareness that in that window, the mother is so vulnerable. And if, she's having cold foods or things that are dampening her digestive fire, if there's lots of visitors, if she's going out a lot and not protecting that sacred bubble, then the exhaustion and the depletion will extend beyond those 40 days. But if you can see that window and really hold yourself in that window or be held in that window, you can wrap that process up in 42 days. And then you step into yet another version of yourself from there, where the actual portal that opened during birth is allowed to close. Otherwise, we have all these beautiful ancestral traditions of closing the bones, for example, where the mother is, literally put back together. And like, I do this process as well myself in my practice, and it's really beautiful just to see, as soon as you wrap the mother up in the rebozos and you leave her there, she's just like this amazing sense of peace comes over her, and you can feel that it's sealing her, it's closing her, because otherwise she's still open. And a lot of the time, the depletion that we feel is energetic, because we don't know where our boundaries are anymore. We've just been cracked open, literally, for another person to pass through us. So those kind of having that awareness of ritual, having that awareness of how significant the birth is, as well as postpartum window, I think, this is the most important thing that a woman can give herself, that awareness.
So beautiful. That ritual sounds really amazing. And I love that idea of closing it out, because you're really like, we are the connection of, we have a portal, right? We're bringing humans in. So to close that out, I'm sure that does so much for the mother for the rest of the process of while the baby is developing. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wow. Thank you so much for everything today. This was so incredible, and I love your vulnerability, and I'm sure everybody learned a lot and would love for you to share. Is there anything else you feel you want to share around this topic right now?
Well, I'm actually in the process of writing a book, so I'm calling it Postpartum is Forever. And so you can, just follow me on Instagram or stay up to date with the process, because it's very close to being finished. And it's basically, I want to tell my story, and I just realized I can't really do that on social media. And I feel like it just needs to all go into a book. So I've been working on that. And it's kind of like a memoir, but also teaching the practices that I used myself to get through that process. So I hope that, it will be a valuable resource for people.
Definitely. I'm so happy you're doing that. I love books, especially because of that, because they're timeless. So it's really something that gets to be passed on through generations, and you have a lot of wisdom, so it's going to be amazing. And well, we're going to put everything in the show notes, but how can people find you, and what are you offering besides the book, of how people could work with you?
So I do offer one-to-one postpartum planning sessions, so I can guide people through the basic pillars of Ayurvedic postpartum care, and I give you recipes that you can use, and birth planning as well, birth education. So it's best to reach out to me on Instagram at the moment, because I'm having a few issues with my website. I'm not very technical, so that always sets me back. But Instagram is so far a solid thing.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And what part of Australia are you in case anybody's nearby?
I'm in Adelaide,
Okay.
South Australia.
Yeah, nice. Thank you so much. This was amazing. I'm so grateful. And yeah, well, I hope everybody that goes your way that needs this service.
Yeah, thank you so much for the conversation. I just really love talking about all this. And I love that you're bringing awareness to these topics that are so important, you know. Yeah.
Thank you.
You made it to the end of the episode, so now it's time for our snuggly heart breath of the day. Place a hand or both hands, if it's safe to do so, over your heart and take a big breath into your heart center. Open your mouth and let it go. I'm so grateful to have shared this time with you. If you enjoyed this combo, please share with your besties and your fam. And if you're a visual person like me, fly over to YouTube and watch the video. If you want to do a random act of kindness today, please leave a 5-star review so more people in the world can get their heart snuggled. You're helping tremendously when you do this, so thank you so much. And as a gift for doing so, I'll give you my Soften Your Heart Medi that feels like an exhale and a hug from within. When you leave a review and email me the screenshot to heartsnuggles@alivetoenjoy.com, you can also find the email in the show notes and you'll get the free meditation. Sending you the warmest, comfiest hug and lots of unexpected blessings your way. Remember that every single person just wants to be loved. So how can you be loved today?